All right, and we are live. Welcome everybody to the July 2023 Ask Me Anything session brought to you by RentPrep. We're going to go ahead and add Josh Ongaro onto the stream. Josh is going to be helping by moderating the discussion today. Josh, how are you?
Andrew, I'm doing good. Back and ready for another edition of the AMA.
Good. Glad to hear it. I am just checking our live stream here, and it looks like we are good to go. We do not have the same tech issue that we had last month. So we think we've figured out what the issue was with that. Sorry for everybody who was tuned in for our June AMA. We wanted to be live for that one, but we ended up having to upload after the fact. This month we are live though, and it looks like this stream is pretty healthy here, so we should be in pretty good shape.
Good. Yeah, that was we've had a couple issues throughout the last couple of months, but I think we've been able to solve them and at least got the AMAs in the past posted to the RentPrep for Landlords Facebook community and the YouTube channel. So I think we're good. Our audience has learned to live with us as we learn these new systems.
You could have told me that my collar was half up on the one side of my shirt before we started the live stream. That would have been.
I couldn't really tell. It's all dark. It's
no, I know with the dark background. Yeah, exactly.
Couldn't really tell. But
so,
all right, well, why don't we jump right into it?
Yeah, let's get into this.
No messing around today.
A lot of questions this month. I don't know if some of these might have been carryovers from June or not, but we have quite a few questions kind of in the queue here this month. So we'll jump right into it and kind of get the ball rolling here. And then if anybody is watching live, obviously you could certainly ask questions in the chat. I don't know as though we'll necessarily get to those. We typically have a lot of questions pre set up here, but if somebody is watching and they have a question or a comment or something like that, go ahead and drop it in, and we will try to bring those in as time goes on here.
Yeah, I will do my best to balance both sets of questions here. But yeah, I do believe we have some spillover from the last AMA, which we were not able to answer. So let's start right here from a form submission question from Veronica. Okay, my husband and I are on title for our rental property and plan to manage the property together. Does that mean that we both are required to be listed on the lease as landlord, or is it okay if only one of us is listed? If he plans to travel for a few months and I am able to get a tenant while he's out of town, is there some kind of document that he can sign to acknowledge that he agrees to the property being rented, if it is necessary for him to be on the lease?
I wish there was a state included in this one. It might not even matter, to be honest with you. So if you're both on title for the rental property and you plan on managing the property together, I would say that you both should be on the lease. Both names should be on the lease. Whenever we have a property that has multiple names on title, we always put all names that are in title on the lease. And then we have to have our management agreement allows us to sign on behalf of our clients, but and if there's multiple owners, there should be multiple signatures on the the lessor side of the equation. You could probably get like a power of attorney signed or something like that. And this is something that, again, it's probably going to depend on the state you're in, because marital property is looked at completely differently. So it might be a situation where if it's a piece of marital property, you both own it 50-50. Maybe you don't even need a power of attorney because you're married. But that would probably be a question that you would run by an attorney and just say, hey, this is what we're trying to do and why. What paperwork do we need to have in place in order to make sure that everything is legit? But yeah, I would think that you would either do like a power of attorney if you need one, and you may not even need to do that depending on what the laws are with regards to marital assets and stuff like that in your state.
Cool. All right, let's roll to the next one. Let's do a question from Natalie. Natalie asks, I have a tenant in Indiana who has a contract move-out date of July 31st and has not found new housing. He isn't planning on leaving on time, and someone else is under contract to move in August. What can I do?
This is a sticky one, man. This is the reason that I don't do move out July 31st, move in August 1st. You leave yourself absolutely no time for turnover. You leave yourself no time in the event of a situation like this. I mean, even if this tenant moved out on July 31st, you might walk into that apartment and find out that they painted the entire apartment dark black. and you have to go through and repaint the apartment. So for that reason, we specifically do not do move
What
out, move in, like a
what
day
type of
apart.
lag? Yeah, what do you do for like a lag time in between, or like a lead time?
It depends on how much work we know we're going to need to do to the unit. So
Yeah,
in New York State, we do have the ability to go in and do a pre-inspection prior to the end of the tenancy. And as a matter of fact, there's some rules regarding the tenant can actually request it between 7 and 14 days prior to the end of their tenancy, and then they have the right to correct anything that you're looking to deduct from their deposit. You have to give them a letter
right.
basically telling, hey, this is the results of the inspection. These are the 4 things that we're going to hit your security deposit for. There may be more things because we couldn't see all the walls and this, that, and the other. So for a situation like that, like we generally know how much time we're going to need, but we might not know how much time we're going to need until we're pretty close to the end of the tenancy. We don't, as a rule, market our apartments until they're ready to go on market. So it's not a situation where we're trying to get a place ready in time for a new tenant to move in. We're not doing a pre-lease necessarily. Unless it's a unit that is in, pristine shape, and we know that we're going to be able to get in there and it's only going to need to be cleaned and then it's going to be ready for the next person. But even still, we always leave some lag time there because there's always something that needs to be done in a unit, and it's always much easier to work in a unit before a
Right.
tenant moves in than once they've moved in. So
Here's a question for you.
mhm,
If you, and I just thought about this, if you go into the property before the lease is over and you
mhm,
notice an issue,
mhm,
is there been a situation where it's been an issue where you don't want the tenant to correct? Say they do damage that you don't necessarily know they would be responsible to fix, or they would fix it
mhm.
the right way. Has there
Right.
been situations where you've told them, like, no, you can't fix this, like, I want to have a verified contractor go in and fix this? Are you allowed to do that? Kind of, how does that
So
work?
by state law, we have to give the tenant a list of items that we're looking to deduct from their deposit, and they have to be given the opportunity to correct those items. And I'm trying to pull up we actually just went through our move out workflow. We've been updating a lot of our processes over the last few months. And now I'm trying to find my move out checklist form. Give me 1 second here because I want to see how I have it worded on there.
Yeah, I'm thinking about like a major appliance. I could understand, like, pinholes in walls and stuff like that, but maybe like, an appliance gets broken, or and you don't trust or don't have a way to verify who the contractor was that fixed it, and then they get out of there, you give them their money back, and
Yeah.
they're off free.
No, you're exactly right. It's a situation where you don't necessarily want a tenant to go in and repaint a room because they could cause more damage by slopping paint on the
Right.
carpet or the hardwood floors or whatever the case may be. But the way that the law is crafted here in New York State, we don't necessarily have that as
Yeah.
we basically have to give them the ability to correct it. We do have in our move out checklist, like the pre-inspection letter that we send out. I'm sorry, the post-inspection letter that we send out, that the work has to be completed by a licensed and insured contractor, and that we need to have a copy of their insurance documents on hand prior to them starting the work. And we can also help you with the work at whatever the hourly rate is and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Realistically speaking, if a tenant has somebody come in and they do slap shot work, we're just going to redo the slap shot work and then charge the tenant for having to redo the work that they did. Just before and after photos is probably what we would do there, and say, we understand that you made an attempt to make a repair here, but your repair was substandard or didn't meet code or whatever the case may be, is kind of how we work with it. We haven't had that
Gotcha.
pop up yet since that law kind of went into effect. That was all part of HSTPA back in 2019, where they added in the new restrictions on all that stuff. And it hasn't turned into an issue yet, but I can definitely, it's poorly worded. The way that the legislation is written is very poorly worded, and I could absolutely see a tenant arguing something like that. But at the end of the day, the statute does say that the thing needs to be returned, the unit needs to be returned back to the condition it was in when they moved
Got
into
it.
it, minus reasonable wear and tear. So if they don't give it to us, even if they hired somebody to do the work, sorry, you just paid somebody to do work that we just had to redo. We're still taking
Yeah.
out your deposit.
No, that makes sense.
I don't know. Did we actually answer Natalie's question? I kind of went off on a rant there.
Hold on. Let's look.
As far as what Natalie should do here, I would say number one, talk to your outgoing tenant and find out when they're going to be out, and then talk to your incoming tenant and let them know, hey, we may not be able to complete your move-in. We may not be able to complete your move-in in a timely fashion because we have a tenant that hasn't moved out yet. We actually do have let me see if I can pull up a copy of my lease here real quick, because we do have language in our lease with regards to not being able to deliver a unit at the time that we were planning on. And occupancy. I'm sure this is fascinating for some people who are
waiting for us to pull stuff up.
Well, but I'd rather give people the better answer, really. Let's see, roof and termite alert. Scroll back down here. Roof and termite alert. That's another good one. Don't ever let people put holes in your roof for satellite dishes. If due to labor trouble, pandemic, government order, lack of supply, tenants active neglect, blah, 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 landlord is delayed or unable to carry out landlord's promises or agreements, supply any services to be supplied, or make any required repair, the lease shall not be ended or the tenant's obligations affected. Landlord shall be excused from performance. No, that's the wrong section. Hang on. We're dragging this on. Let's continue to move forward, and I'll see if I can find that.
You're good. And while you were searching so diligently for that, I wanted to pull this up while I was thinking about damage to a rental property. I'm going to share my screen. Let me know if you can see it. I just had a buddy send me this photo. He was swatting a fly with a paper towel in a Buffalo apartment that he's renting, and they are very old houses in North Buffalo area. And he went to slap the glass with it and completely put his hand through the window of this rental property and ended up actually cutting his hand pretty good wide open. But he is now on the hunt for fixing this. And that last question where we got off on a tangent just kind of made me think about this. But yeah, he shattered the glass pretty good there.
Yeah, that's a nasty one too. He's lucky that he didn't wind up with a lot more severe cut on his hand or something like that, because those older windows can really do some damage. The plate glass,
Oh yeah.
And actually, I just found the section of the lease that I was trying to pull up, so I'm going to see if I can do a screen share here, if it'll let me. There we go. Landlord shall make a reasonable effort to have the premises ready on time. Circumstances beyond landlord's control could cause delay. Tenant agrees the landlord's not liable for damage if the premise is not ready at the time stipulated on the application. In the event of a delay, rent shall be abated on a daily basis until the tenant is given possession. If landlord's not able to deliver premise within 7 days after the date promised, then tenant may elect in writing to terminate the lease. After such termination, tenant is only entitled to refund of deposit and any rent paid. Landlord will not be liable for any consequential damages the tenant incurs, if any, as a result of a termination of the lease. Rent abatement or lease termination does not apply if delay is for cleaning or repairs that don't prevent tenant from occupying the premises. So essentially what we did here was set it up such that if we can't deliver the apartment on time because of a situation basically exactly like what Natalie's dealing with here, we just abate the rent on a day-to-day basis until such time that tenant is able to move in. And if it's a drawn-out situation that goes longer than a week, we're not going to hold somebody hostage while we wait for somebody else to move out. They're more than welcome to terminate their lease and move on and find a different place. So it's, I knew I had language in my lease. I was just trying to find it. We just went through and did as part of doing the lease update and the move-out condition, sorry, not the move-out condition, the move-out checklist letter that we did. We're kind of going through and updating a lot of processes, and those were two processes that we just updated, and I knew there was something in there, so I wanted to make sure we got the correct language on that.
No, that's good. Glad we were able to find it. Okay, let's push forward. I'm going to grab a Facebook question here. Let's change it up a little bit. This one is a question from Kristen. So Kristen asks, she's looking for some guidance. I know I screwed up, so be kind. I'm renting out a house. I require a 1-year lease minimum that prospective tenants tell me they want, and then a Prospective tenants tell me they want a 2-year lease. That's fine. We meet to sign a lease. They now want a 2-month lease just in case their dad buys an apartment complex.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not pleased, but some rent is better than no rent. So regrettably, I agree. With the stipulation they need to give me 30 days notice when they leave.
Mm-hmm.
They say their dog lives at their parents' home down the road, but ask if he can come play fetch with the kids without paying the pet deposit. I say fine as long as the dog isn't a permanent fixture and does not enter the home.
Mm-hmm.
This week I drive by and I see a dog kennel installed onto the garage man door.
Mandor. Yeah.
Yeah, man door. And the dog is living there full time in the garage. My repairman visits and they tell him the dog run they installed is temporary. They are putting in a permanent one later. So telling the literally
Great.
telling the repairman that they're putting in a permanent dog home right there. I'm thinking about telling them I'm not renewing their lease. It ends July 31st and giving them 30 days to vacate. I don't want to argue about the dog. I just feel like
And then
the
it cuts
question
off.
got cut up here, but I think it's just I've been overly kind or overly
Yeah.
understanding about most situations with this.
I think she's right. I think that's probably the best way to handle it. I would, well, and we're in July now too. I think this might have been a question that was a rollover from last month.
Yeah, I think it
Um,
was.
I would do exactly that. I would terminate the lease, give them their 30 days notice. I would also issue a lease violation letter for the dog and the dog kennel, because obviously neither one of those are permitted. Even if you were allowing the dog to come over and play fetch with the kids in the yard or whatever, it's escalated past that point now. Like now you have a
Right.
permanent or a semi-permanent fixture that this dog is now using, and it's just gonna. This is gonna those situations is just gonna continue to escalate unless you deal with it. I probably would have said. I probably would have stopped and pumped the brakes at the they wanted to sign a 2-year lease and now they want to sign a 2-month lease. I probably would have said, sorry, no, I'm not. And from my perspective, once somebody moves into an apartment, that apartment has to go through a turnover process when they move out. Even if it's just cleaning and a little bit of light paint touch-ups, there's still a cost to that and a time to that. And to sit and screen somebody for a 2-month lease, I'm not in the business of medium-term rental. So, I mean, maybe other people would have a different opinion on that, but for where I'm sitting, it makes no sense to do a 2-month lease at all, ever. I would not have jumped into that situation.
What's your thought on the tenant wanting what's the benefit to the tenant with a 2-year lease?
I wonder if we actually have another question. I don't know if it made it onto the list for today or not, but there was a question that was asked about a tenant requesting a 3-year lease. And it's one of those situations where, first of all, it's state dependent. Some states actually have a maximum that you can have for a residential lease term. So that's something you got to look into first and foremost. A lot of times, if you have somebody that knows that they're going to be in a certain place longer term, they want to secure their housing for a little bit more of a longer period of time, kind of locking in their rent rate and locking in the home so that they know they have it and stuff like that. This can be a real double-edged sword, though, because if you end up with a tenant from hell, then you are now locked into a long-term lease with that tenant. And yes, you can probably find ways to get out of the lease by issuing lease violation letters and this and that and the other thing. But depending on the state that you're in, if you have a 2-year lease, you may be in a real nasty long-term situation with a tenant that you don't want to deal with. So I, generally speaking, don't recommend longer term residential leases. Honestly, our leases are 1 year. And if somebody approaches us during their lease term and they need to break their lease for something, we give some strong consideration to it, because at the end of the day, the goal is for the property to be rented by paying tenant. And if we have a tenant that approaches us and says, I can't pay the rent anymore because I lost my job, I can't pay the rent anymore because I need to move across the country, holding that person to a lease that they're not going to be able to afford, rather than just letting them out of the lease and finding a new tenant, like take the deposit, charge the tenant for the rent and security until you get a new tenant in place, which is what you're supposed to do in New York, and just move on. Like, get a new tenant that's going to be a performing member or a performing tenant in your property. That's the goal at all times, is to have performing tenants in your rental properties. So I don't understand dragging somebody through, like, even on, we get to a point where we're getting ready for like a non-payment eviction. a lot of times we'll give our non-payment tenants one last chance to just move out before we go that route, in the form of a cash for keys, or if you remove, if you're out by the end of the month, we'll give you your deposit back in full or whatever, just to try to avoid going through the court process and the whole thing. Like, it's, by the time you go through and do the service and the court process and the delays and everything associated, sometimes it's 2-3 months before you get to a set out.
Yeah.
And at that point, you're better off just doing a cash for keys, getting control of your asset. And yeah, it sucks. Yeah, you're going to pay some money, but you would be better off doing that and getting rid of a tenant that's not going to work for you and putting a tenant in that is going to work for you. It's one of those things where you have to swallow your pride. And there are a lot of property owners that are bad at that. So some people will do it and some people won't.
I think, I think obviously when the tenant brings up going from a 2-year lease to a 2-month lease, like that to me right away is something's going on. And then
such a massive red flag, like something changed drastically in their situation.
Yeah. And it looks like Kristen was being nice, letting him have the dog on the property, made it clear she didn't want the dog in the property. And then the tenant goes and is telling the repairman that they plan to put a permanent fixture right off the garage for the pet. So
like our lease, if you install, say you put a rack in your closet, like a really nice closet rack, technically that's a fixture now that belongs to the house. You don't get to remove that and take it with you when you move out, which is why most tenants don't do things like that. Mm-hmm. This exact same situation that would come into play. You now have a temporary structure that's been built or attached to an existing structure, which they intend to remove and build another new structure. How much damage are they causing to the garage that it's being attached to? How much damage are they causing running stuff around in the yard to build this new dog? How much damage are they causing to the yard just having a dog that's contained to a run that can only move back and forth, 20 feet or whatever? There's definitely going to be some property damage on this. I would say the fastest thing that you can do would be terminate this lease, give them the notice, tell them to get out of there, and be prepared for them to not leave, because this sounds like the type of situation where these tenants are going to stay and be a real thorn in your side until you go through the eviction process.
Yeah.
Or until their father finds an apartment complex and they can move their dog to the apartment complex. Everybody will love that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm interested to see what Kristen ended up doing here.
Yeah.
But all right, let's move on. Let's go back to the form submitted questions. Let's do this one from Mason. Mason asks, what is the best way to define guest on the lease contract? It says California, to protect landlords from additional residents.
Oh, give me 1 second. I'm just grabbing my lease again because I want to see how we have it worded. And obviously I'm not in California. Their laws are, California's crazy, man. Guests.
Protect landlords from additional residents. Yeah, and I'm guessing Mason has had an experience where there has been a couple tenants and they seem to have people that have been staying at the property for much longer than maybe what a guest would be classified as. So I'm curious to see what the lease. I remember my leases back in the day. I can't remember the actual verbiage on them.
Yeah. So I just popped it up on screen.
Yeah,
so this is the section of our lease where we list additional occupants. So like minors under the age of 18, and maybe if you have like an older person living in the home that's non-contributory, we would put them on the additional occupants line. By no means may tenant allow any additional persons to occupy the premises beyond limit proposed by the law. Tenant agrees to assume all responsibility for actions taken by any person entering the property. Landlord will hold tenant solely responsible for all damages to property or for violations against this rental agreement. Immediate family may occupy the unit for up to 30 days without penalty. And I think that is a state statute. Actually, we'll go ahead and look at the top part of that. Tenant agrees to use the premises for residential living purposes only. No business may be run from the property. Premises occupied by tenant and his or her immediate family and by the occupants listed below. That's where these lines come in for the additional use. If persons not listed on this agreement occupy the premises, an additional rent of $150 per occupant will be charged for such occupancy during each month or fraction of a month that the party occupies the apartment. So, and actually all parties are subject to approval by management. That's a nice thing to have in there as well, because then in theory we should be doing credit and
Right.
background checks on anybody who's moving into an apartment.
Right.
So
And then I remember, I can't remember the actual date, but I believe there was specific language in a couple of my old leases where it was like, if it is a non-family member, they cannot be at the residence for more than like 7 consecutive days. It was very weird. It was a lease that I had out in
mhm.
Rochester, but it was like family members can stay for this long, which was much longer.
Yeah.
And then it was like, oh yeah, regular. And this was kind of like a college house lease, so maybe
Mhm.
it had something to do with that. It was a little bit more specific, but yeah, non-family members, I think it was like, it might have been 3 days. They weren't allowed to exceed that limit for staying over, but I
Yeah.
can't remember. That
I
might not
think
even be
that
allowed.
Yeah, I think that our lease, I think this is one of the sections that was updated when we did our lease renewal, because I remember there being a day in there, like a number of days, and it was shorter than 30. I know that the family thing is up to 30 days by state statute, but
Yeah, that makes
I'll have to
sense.
go back and look at that. I want to say it was like 7 days or 14 days is what we had written into our lease previously, but I would honestly, I would have to double check that and see what the statute is in New York. I mean, and to
Yeah,
answer Mason's question, you first need to check your state law and find out what the guidance is in your area. And I'm sure that California has something stipulated because it's the state of California.
right.
And then as far as the language goes, I mean, I just call them, additional persons or additional parties, something along those lines. I wouldn't refer to them as guests. I would refer to them as additional parties or whatever the case may be. And that's how we've handled it. It's really hard to prove a situation where somebody is staying for longer than what they should be, or you have someone that's living in a unit that is not supposed to be living in the unit. Like, short of hiring someone to sit in front of the house and watch it 24/7, or putting cameras up such that you can see everybody that enters and exits the home and their comings and goings, it's a real challenge to prove anything like this. And I think that it's oftentimes a gigantic waste of time. And I understand, like, we do have a duty to protect other tenants in the building, and we should be running credit and background checks on anybody that's living in units and things of that nature. But this is one of those situations where it's incredibly difficult to truly monitor and react to a situation like that, because everybody's going to have a story. Oh, it's just
Yeah,
my friend, he's going to be here for a week, he's on vacation, and this, it
yeah.
is what it is. It's one of
No,
those things that's incredibly you could literally spend your entire life just trying to chase stuff like this around as a property manager if you've got more than, say, 50 doors. I guarantee you, if you have more than 50 doors, you probably have illegal occupants. There's no doubt in
yeah,
my mind. I'm not saying that, like, it's just a fact of life. It's very easy for somebody to say, oh, you can come stay here for a couple days after a breakup, and then 6 months later that person is still there, but they're not on any of the paperwork. So
right.
it's a
No,
tough one.
for sure. All right, let's jump into a Facebook question. I like this one from Max. This was interesting. So Max asks, or he says, I hired this new plumber to install a new hot water tank. His younger
Mm-hmm.
helper is alone with me while he's trying to disconnect it and tells me I don't like or he doesn't like an audience. I
Mm-hmm.
don't need people watching me. How would you respond? That one's that one's interesting.
It's it's a little weird. That said, I generally speaking don't stand around watching the tradesmen do their job. Like, if I'm hiring somebody, it's because I have the faith and confidence that they're going to go out and do the job to the best of their ability. If they're
Right,
licensed and they're insured, then I really should have no concern over their ability to do the job.
right.
Um, so
Um,
I don't follow them around. Like, if a tenant is home, then the tenant can sit there and watch them if they want. But realistically speaking, I don't know of anybody who really likes to have somebody staring over their shoulder the entire time that they're working, whether it be being micromanaged in an office or having a customer stand, in the kitchen while you're working under their sink, or whatever the case may be. No
yeah.
one enjoys being micromanaged. And if you hired a competent tradesperson, you shouldn't have to micromanage the job. You should be able to check the after results and
Hmm.
make sure that they achieved what you were trying to get them to achieve.
Yeah, and this sounds like just maybe a little bit of anxiety for like trying to source a first time contractor, or maybe
Yeah.
you don't have that relationship yet. So it just
Hmm.
seems like, I'm with you. I think, Andrew, I think, once you trust your contractors and all that, like
Hmm.
until they prove you wrong, you keep pushing forward. So
Well,
I'd be
and
interested to get
there's
an update on where Max is at
where
and
Max
how
wound
the
up
how
on
the
that.
hot water, yeah, how the tank ended up going, or if they even
Right.
continued with the job.
Well, and we're at a point where like we have vendors that we allow to go to tenants' properties when the tenant's just at work or whatever. Like if the tenant gives permission to enter, we have guys that we've been working with for so long that we trust them to be in tenant properties without one of us standing around with them. Like we just have that inherent trust. And they have insurance. So like even if something was to go down, in theory, their insurance would cover them. So in the 14-ish years that I've been doing property management, I think we've only had maybe 2 accusations, and both of
Yeah.
them were discredited pretty quickly. If you're working
Yeah.
with reputable people, you generally speaking don't have these problems. That said, it doesn't take much for someone to get sticky fingers as they're walking through a place. So I guess it's ultimately a decision that you need to make for your business as to your level of comfort. Do you stand over the guy's shoulder while he's putting in a new faucet? Or do you let him do his job and go check on it after the fact? And more
Right.
often than not, we let our guys just go out and do the jobs that they're supposed to be there to do. We trust them. That's why we hired them.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I think that's good. All right, let's do another Facebook one here. This question is from Andrew. Theoretical question. You find good tenants, sign a 1-year lease, and the house starts off clean, new paint, new carpets, new appliances, et cetera, et cetera. Let's say you go there to do a check in 6 months and the house is very, all in caps, dirty.
Mm-hmm.
Greasy kitchen appliances, fingerprints on walls, et cetera, et cetera. Here's my question. What can I really do about it if I can't call them slobs. I can't tell them they need to hire a house cleaner. I can't start cleaning it myself. What do you do about it other than not renew a lease when it runs out?
I would send them a lease violation letter and basically tell them that they are not keeping up the covenant in their lease with regards to cleaning.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tenant
I
agrees to
mean,
keep the premises and, if applicable, the basement and garage in a clean and orderly manner. And when vacating the premises, it will be left free of debris and in broom clean condition, including exterior and interior of all appliances, cabinets, closets. I want to say that we also have some language in here about being a good neighbor and making sure that your place is not disgusting.
yeah.
But that might have actually come out when we did the. Yeah, tenant responsibility. Good housekeeping is expected of everyone. Tenant agrees to keep quarters clean and in sanitary condition. The tenant agrees not to permit any deterioration or destruction to occur while they are occupying the property. And then it goes on to talk about making sure that you take your garbage out on time and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
yeah, good housekeeping is expected of all tenants. And if we have a situation where somebody is, you can't necessarily expect someone to keep their home to the same level of clean that you may keep your home to. Everyone has a different level of what they feel is acceptable when it comes to having a clean home.
Yeah.
That said, if they're in a situation where there is food left all over, there's grease on the stove that you can scrape off with a putty knife, there's situations where you're going to wind up with mice or rats or whatever because they're simply not taking care of any aspect of the cleaning of the home. At that point, I would say, yeah, it's time to step in and send a letter and say, you need to clean. If you don't clean, we're going to terminate your tenancy, and then you're going to be responsible for all of the cleaning that we have to do after you move out. Some tenants
Yeah.
will take the prompt and start cleaning. Others will take that as a massive insult. Most people probably fall somewhere in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
It's a tough one because, like I said, you can't really tell somebody you don't want a home to be hazardous ever, but you can't, like, there's a difference between clutter and filth is, I think, what I'm really driving at there.
Yeah.
And even
Yeah.
clutter can be hazardous if it turns into a hoarding situation. So yeah, definitely something that you need to keep in your lease and definitely something you need to keep on top of.
Yeah, non-related, but sort of related. I remember my first ever rental property. So the first ever one I rented.
Mm-hmm.
I was very inexperienced as a tenant. Like I was excited to get into a place. Like it was a 5-bedroom, like 3-story house out in Rochester.
Mm-hmm.
And we had moved in and like the place was supposed to be cleaned by the
Hmm.
landlord and have a service go in there and all that. And we got in there and the place was absolutely filthy. We had to like pull the fridge apart. There was like there was mold in the fridge. We had to
Hmm.
soak everything in these tubs. And one of the things we never took pictures, which is very not a good move,
Yeah.
I would say.
Right.
We were so inexperienced that instead of like making a point about it, making a stink about it, it was our first property. The whole place was just disgusting. And I know this
Hmm.
doesn't really relate to the question, but it just made me think like I know landlords will take their and the property managers will take photos of the property before, but like
Right.
as a tenant too, word of good advice, take photos of the property as you move in
Hmm.
there, like document that, save that. And every property from there on out, I made sure that I was taking photos and
Absolutely.
making sure everything was
Absolutely.
kept how it and returned to to the landlord in the condition that it was.
Well, and it's staggering how many tenants don't think to take photos. Like, if you see me walking around taking photos of stuff, you should probably be walking around taking photos too, because I'm not going to lose my photo set.
Yeah.
So like we've had instances where, and honestly, like I would say this happens more often than not, where we'll have a situation where we'll have a good set of move-in photos from when the tenant moved in, and they'll go to move out and they won't clean. The most common things are they won't clean the inside of the stove and they won't like wipe out the inside of the cabinets. A lot of times you still
Mhm.
find cabinets that have crap left in them.
Yeah.
So we charge for that stuff because you have to. Somebody has to clean that stove. And every single time we'll get a tenant screaming about, but that stove was clean, blah, 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 blah. And I'll just send them the inside picture from before and the inside picture from after and say, what part of that looks clean? And more often than
Yeah.
not, they drop it right then and there.
Yeah.
That's probably one of the most common things. Rip screens, stoves, refrigerators, and cabinets that haven't been cleaned up. Those are probably the most common things that we see when we go in to do turnover repairs, as far as
Yeah.
like tenant billable type stuff.
No, that makes sense. But yeah, it was definitely a lesson learned for me as I think I'm not kidding. We might have spent close to like 6 or 7 hours, like as a group of 5 guys, getting the property to a condition where we even felt it was good to go. And that
Habitable.
was
Yeah.
just, an experience of being a tenant
Hmm.
and, not great landlording, but it is what it is. You learn from it. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Student housing landlords get away with a lot, a
yes,
lot. It's scary
no,
what they get away with.
yeah, for sure. All right, let's jump back into the form submission questions and
Okay.
let's go to this question from Claire. If I write it in the lease as such, can fines and late fees be considered rent and therefore grounds for eviction after being given 3 days to cure? I have a tenant that refuses to pay late fees. For example, he said he put the rent in the outgoing mail at work, but then his colleague forgot to put the basket of letters in the mailbox. So it is not his fault,
Right.
etc. And says I am not paying the late fee. All right.
So sorry, I'm trying to scroll and see if I can find that question on my page here too. There we go.
All right.
Found it. Um, can fines and late fees be considered rent and therefore grounds for eviction after being given 3 days to cure? It's going to depend on your state. Different states have different rules on what can and cannot be considered additional rent. So that's something that you're going to want to talk to probably an attorney that knows landlord tenant law in your state to get the true answer on that, because we don't have a state listed here. So I'm just not sure what
Yeah.
state you're in. So if you are in a state where, late fees and damages and fines and things like that become additional rent, that's a really good position to find yourself in, because if they don't pay it, then they haven't paid their rent and you just start a non-payment eviction. So I would say if you're in a state where that's allowable, that's a good position to find yourself in. And you need to make sure that your lease stipulates that these things can be considered additional rent, whether it be a late fee or damages or whatever. It needs to be in your lease such that, unless it's in state statute, it needs to be in your lease such that, if this late fee goes in after 3 days, it becomes additional rent, whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
So the way that we are set up with our lease, essentially we apply the payments that come in to the oldest charge on the ledger. So if somebody didn't pay their May rent and it's July and they make a rent payment, It's not going on their ledger for July. It's going on their ledger for May because that's the oldest possible charge. Same thing with late fees. So if somebody sends me their May check in July, they now have May late fee, June late fee, July, and today's July 17th. So July late fee, we're going to apply that rent check to May. So now they send us a check for June. Okay. We'll say that it's mid-July. They send us their check for June, or they send us another rent check. We're going to apply that for first to the May late fee, because that's the oldest charge, and then to the June rent. So now they still have a remainder on their June rent, plus their June late fee, plus all of July. So it always applies to the oldest possible charge on the ledger moving forward.
Right.
And more often than not, if you have like a repair charge or something like that that's getting thrown in the mix, then you are going to be in a situation where you have a month or so of unpaid rent. And at that point, I would just start the non-payment eviction.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's definitely one that you've got to look into your state statutes on, to see if they allow for the conversion of charges to additional rent.
Yeah. Good. All right.
And also, before we jump away from that, you had mentioned, he said he put the rent in the outgoing mailbox at work, but then his colleague forgot to put the basket of letters. Listen, it's your responsibility to make sure your rent is paid. So if somebody mails rent, we go by the postmark date on the envelope. But if somebody, is making a rent payment online or whatever the case may be, it's that the payment was made. So if you mail something and you mailed it late and it didn't get postmarked until after the rent was due, you still owe that late fee. We'll take it back as far as the postmark date, because that's when it's out of your hands essentially. Right. But it's still considered due if your late fee. I'm sorry, you're still going to get a late fee if you end up mailing it on the 6th or 7th of the month, for instance.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, let's do another Facebook question. This one is this is a form question, actually. This one is from Shaw. All right, so Shaw says, my tenant is very rude to speak with. While I try to be as objective/respectful as I can, he has, on one or two occasions, paid the rent late. Everything is paid so far, 100%. The property is being used very aggressively, and there is some damage due to that reason. So far, the cost of repair would be close to 1 month's rent. But I made the mistake of leasing for 22 months, so they have 1 more year. I have also incurred a cost of about $200 so far for the copay on my home warranty service requests, as they had put a loose screw into the garbage disposal and flooded the bathroom on another occasion. The lease explicitly states that the owner is only responsible for wear and tear repairs, but I did not pursue this. I strongly believe they would not pay the last month's rent and ask me to adjust the security deposit strictly prohibited by the lease. My intent is not to open a costly legal battle and let the lease expire, at which point I will sue them for all the repairs and charge them in a fair and honest manner after getting the home checked out.
So there's a lot in here.
There's a couple things going on
in here. So if a tenant is causing, we'll start with the first one, which is the property being used very aggressively and there being some property damage as a result. If a tenant is causing damages to your unit, repair the damages and send the tenant a letter indicating that they're now responsible for the cost of that repair.
Yeah.
Every state's a little bit different as to how you go about, back billing a tenant. And you should definitely have something in your lease that allows you to go back in and back bill a tenant, kind of like what we were talking about with the additional rent in the previous question. Mm-hmm. More often than not, that's the way that it works, is any damages caused by tenant are converted into additional rent and applied to the tenant ledger.
So with the bathroom flood, or the garbage disposal be considered wear and tear repairs?
No, neither one of those would be wear and tear. Not from the information presented to me by the sounds of things here. Putting a loose screw into a garbage disposal, if they were the ones who dropped the screw in there, it's no different than dropping a fork in the garbage disposal. That's a tenant caused, might have been an accident, but it doesn't mean that it wasn't caused by the tenant. Accidents happen each and every day. People get in car accidents all the time. Doesn't mean that they went out that morning and intended to slam into the back end of somebody at a stoplight.
Mhm.
But it does mean that they're responsible for the cost of
Yeah.
that repair. So that's probably what I would do. I would charge the tenant for the repairs, and explain to them, look, you guys caused this. You flooded a bathroom, which caused damage to another unit. You dropped something into the garbage disposal, which required me to send a service person out, and you're going to be responsible for those costs. Made the mistake of leasing for 22 months. We just talked about how sometimes long-term leases can be a headache, and this is exactly what I meant when we were talking about that. Home warranty service requests. Home warranties are garbage. Get rid of it as soon as you can. I don't like home warranties. I think they're garbage, and especially in a landlord-tenant situation, I think they create a lot more problems than they solve. The lease explicitly states that the owner's only responsible for wear and tear repairs. Again, none of these are wear and tear, kind of like what you and I had just said there. And she should have pursued it at the time. So depending on the
Yeah.
state and depending on what the rules are, you may or may not be able to pursue the tenant for those damages after the tenancy. There might be a statute you can only charge for X number, period of time or whatever. But my thought process here is that based on what we're seeing, the information that we have in front of us here, I'm willing to bet that the tenants are probably going to try to use their security deposit towards their last month so that they can use that money toward the money they would have been paying for rent towards the security deposit on their next place so that they can get out. As far as pursuing them after the fact, you can go that route. You can go small claims. You can go civil court if depending on how much damage there is and stuff like that. Again, depending on your state, it may or may not be worthwhile. In New York State, you'll get a judgment that's valid against somebody for about 10 years. And I believe you can also renew the judgment for another 10 years after that, which, if you have $10,000 worth of property damage, yeah, I would say it's probably worth pursuing at that point.
Yeah.
If you have a couple $100s worth of property damage, you're going to spend more time and more money just trying to get through the court process than you are actually likely going to collect on that judgment. And by the way, a judgment doesn't mean they're going to pay you. It means that you have a piece of paper that says that they owe you money. That's it. That's all. You could sell your judgment maybe to a collection agency or something like that. There are some out there that will buy money judgments, but oftentimes they require a lot more background paperwork and stuff like that. So that's, another story for another day.
Yeah. Okay. Let's do this one. It's a Facebook question from Lenny. Tenant's child left sink running on full blast and it flooded the apartment below.
Mm.
Professional water damage company came in and set up commercial dehydrators, $650. Contractor is coming in to put in drop ceiling, wet plaster ceiling collapsed, and new flooring, no price yet. My insurance adjuster said that my deductible is so high, $2,500, that this claim might not be worth submitting. So do I submit the entire cost of the tenant upstairs? I can't go after his insurance company. Only my insurance company can do that.
I'm surprised that the insurance adjuster is saying that it might not be worth submitting, because it sounds to me like this is way more than $2,500 worth of work.
Yeah.
If the dehydrators were $650 alone,
right.
I know enough about construction to be able to say that this is going to be well over $2,500 worth of work, depending on how big of an area was impacted by this water damage and stuff like that. But
well, you're doing those and the ceiling collapse, the new
right,
floor,
the ceiling, the floor, you're going to be well over $2,500. If your tenant has renter's insurance, your insurance company should automatically be trying to go after the tenant's renter's insurance policy.
Yeah.
If the insurance company determines that the tenant was the root cause of the issue, then they honestly should be trying to go after the tenant, even if the tenant doesn't have insurance. I don't know how many insurance companies will actually go ahead and pursue something like that. But I could see the property owner's insurance not wanting to pick up the tab on this because it was caused by a tenant. So that might be why the insurance adjuster is trying to kind of push this to the tenant side of things. But realistically speaking, if the tenant has renter's insurance, their renter's insurance should be picking up the cost of this, I would think.
Yeah.
I would say this is definitely this sounds to me like it's probably in the area of $7,500 to $10,000 worth of damage without breaking a sweat, depending on if there's walls that need to be opened or if there's any buckling in the floors or anything like that needs to be corrected. This is going to be way more than $2,500 for sure.
I think so. Oh yeah, I think so. Okay, let's do Let's do this one question from Kim. A couple signed a 1-year lease in February. He moved out in May. She's been able to manage rent until now. July was 9 days late, but she paid in full, including late fees. Her mom is going to move in to help her. Background check, or background and application, of course. The question is, should I just add her as an additional tenant to the original lease or do a new lease for the mom and daughter? And how do I handle the security deposit refund since the girlfriend isn't moving?
All right. So she's been able to manage the rent. July was 9 days late, but she paid in full, including late fees. Her mom's going to move in.
But the couple didn't break. They didn't break up, or
He moved out in May. Yeah, it doesn't say
moved. Okay, he did move out. All
whether or
right.
not he's signed off on the lease yet or not, though. She's able to
Okay.
rent now. So if there's a couple different ways that you can do this, if he's still willing to sign paperwork, I would say that the proper way to do this would probably be terminate that lease in its entirety, and then refund the security deposit. However, you need to do that in your state, and then collect a new security deposit from mom and daughter and just start a new lease with them. Having the mom as an additional tenant to the original lease, he still has rights to the property. And I think that that's probably what they're trying to eliminate. The only way to eliminate the rights to the property is to terminate that original lease with him, and everybody goes their separate ways, and you start a new lease. Or he needs to sign out of the existing lease, and mom needs to sign into the new lease, an add drop kind of a situation, which that's an option too. But in this situation, I would probably just make it a fresh lease.
So you would do the full security deposit. You wouldn't do partial. You would give the full thing, get it back to clean even, and then collect another one from the new tenants in the property. Essentially,
that's probably the easiest way to handle security deposit situations. Like this is the most common question that's asked in the RentPrep groups about how do I handle security deposit when somebody moves out but somebody else is staying in the unit. And we basically tell, it's like written into our leases and on everything else, that whoever is living in the unit at the time of move out is who we're refunding the deposit to. We do one check to every party that's written on the lease, and everybody needs to sign it, and you guys can figure it out after the fact.
Right.
We're not going to sit and say this person's getting 100, this person's getting 500, blah 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 blah. We're not doing that.
Yeah.
In this instance, with the original tenants having a security deposit, I think the cleanest way to do this would be cut a 2-party check to the girlfriend and boyfriend, and then get a new deposit in from the mother and daughter, and pursue it that way. There are other ways of doing it. I'm not saying that this is necessarily the be all end all way of doing it. You also have to check your laws in your state to make sure that you're, handling the deposit the way that you need to. But realistically speaking, I think the cleanest way to handle this situation would be a full move out of basically the boyfriend and girlfriend. Mom and daughter now sign a new lease with mom and daughter on it after mom passes the credit and background check, and they go through that process. I think that's the cleanest way to make it work from a paperwork standpoint.
Yeah, I think so. All right, let's do another form submission question from David. I have a property in Minnesota with a soon to be tenant, lease signed but not moving in until August, that asked me about having a long-term guest, at least 3 months, that would be there shortly after they move in. I already told them I'd want them to sign the guest to sign a lease addendum outlining the term and their stay, abiding by the lease, etc. I'm wondering if it's reasonable / legal for me to charge a long-term guest fee for this, primarily to cover my time to create an addendum, cover increased water sewer costs, potential additional wear and tear on the unit. Also, is there anything else I should be considering at this? I wanted to do this one because I feel like we talked a little bit. We were talking for, I don't know, 10 minutes on guests. Yeah.
Well, and this is a good example. This is a situation where this is going to be a long-term guest. I would probably have some kind of an addendum. They would definitely need to do credit and background checks with us. And I think that it's appropriate to charge a little bit extra on a monthly basis for the duration that guest is there, because you hit the nail on the head. There is additional wear and tear. There's certainly additional water and sewer usage. And if that's an expense, or other utilities, whatever utilities are on the landlord, that cost is going up because there's another body in the unit using those resources. So I don't think that I think it would be very appropriate to charge a little bit extra on a monthly basis. I can tell you that our lease stipulates that if we find an unknown occupant, like we were talking about the use earlier, where I was showing that piece of my lease, we charge, I believe it was $150 for every month or portion of month where the unknown person was living in the unit. So there's a penalty there. And with the penalty being 150, I would say that the increase in rent should be less than that, because it encourages people to go the right path. It encourages people to actually go through the process of having the tenant screened and added to the lease legitimately, so that the process is done correctly. As far as how much should you add, I think that's going to be market dependent. And I think it's going to depend on what utilities you have included with the rent, what appliances you have included with the rent, and things of that nature.
Yeah, no, I think David did a nice job with just how he started to handle this.
Yeah, I think it's very reasonable. I don't think that he's asking for anything unreasonable there. And I think that's something that the tenant would understand. Like, there's more wear and tear and more usage in the unit. There should be at least I'm not saying it needs to be a huge amount, but you should have some sort of compensation for that.
Yeah, but properties are priced and prepared and for the number of occupants that are supposed to be inhabiting. And I'm not, if you have a guest, like you said, like he hit the nail on the head, there's going to be additional wear and tear. There's going to be an increase in the water. There's going to be, additional charges. So yeah, you got to find that sweet spot. And you're right, market dependent on what that increase would be. But still fair enough to encourage tenants to go about it the right way.
Mm-hmm. We're coming up on the end. I know we've got a couple more minutes left here, and I wanted to hit this question from Vandale, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I apologize if I'm not. Simply because he's been super, super active in the RentPrep group lately, and I wanted to acknowledge that, and I wanted to make sure we got his question up on the screen, because I think he had one last month that did not get asked. So, do you have that one up, or you want me to read it
off? Sorry, I was muted. I was muted. All right, here we go. I think does it start with we have? We have all. Okay. Question from Vandal. We have all of our rental qualifications documented on our website, as well as all advertising we do. And we do a pre-screen before viewing the property. However, we still have unqualified people that don't read and apply for the unit anyway. As part of our screening process, we have a policy that every application that is submitted to us requires a $55 fee for the background check via RentPrep. This fee is collected when the application is submitted, and I've been screening people for a while now, and sometimes I can just tell by looking at an application that the applicant isn't qualified. Example, I know you don't make 3 times the rent, working part-time, making minimum wage. Is it still appropriate to charge the applicant the fee, even though I know they don't qualify based on their answers? Currently, I process all applications no matter what through RentPrep. There are no refunds. My intention of this policy is so everyone is treated equally, and I can't be accused of discrimination. Is this the best process?
Not only is it the best process, I wish everyone would listen to what he's doing. Yeah, it's absolutely the right process. I'm going to tell you what a fair housing attorney told me a couple of years ago that stuck with me. If you don't treat everyone exactly the same, that is when you are opening up the door to discrimination.
Yeah.
So there's 2 parts to this. And we talk about this all the time because RentPrep is a tenant screening company, and I hate to beat a dead horse, but here we are. Tenant screening is a snapshot in time, and there's nothing that says that someone doesn't lose their job 2 days after you approve them for a rental property. Tenant screening is a snapshot in time. That's a true story, and it happened to me.
Yeah.
Literally happened to me. I signed a lease, and 2 days later got laid off from a job. Tenant screening is something that should be done every single time on every single applicant, and it should be the same process each time. You have written criteria. You have them on your website. You fully disclose to these people what they need to do to qualify for the apartment prior to applying. If they choose to apply for an apartment, knowing that they don't meet the criteria, which are freely available on the website. As a matter of fact, we actually have people sign off on the criteria before they continue their application, just so that there's no question of, well, I didn't know that. Well, then you signed something you didn't read. Yes. Treat every single application the same. If somebody wants to apply for an apartment, you hand them an application or you give them the link to your website, no matter what, even if you know they're not going to qualify, because it's on them to decide if they want to make that application. It's on them to decide if they want to spend that $55. And if they are not following the criteria, like if they don't meet the criteria and are still willing to go through the process just to get a denial, then that's on them. Yes,
Yeah.
it's definitely, it sucks. Like none of us want to do that. And I hear a lot of people complaining that every time they turn around, it's $20, $20, $20 for a credit and background check. And then they never get any response. And I have a feeling that more often than not, it's because people are not spending the time to read the selection criteria, assuming they're posted. I know a lot of landlords don't. Security through obscurity is the method that a lot of people to take, which is going to wind up, it's going to wind up with them in a fair housing lawsuit. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
But yeah, having a set of written criteria and following that written set of criteria every single time on every single applicant, assuming that your criteria are fair housing compliant, will keep you safe. If your criteria are garbage, it's garbage in, garbage out. It's just programming. If you have bad criteria that aren't fair housing compliant and you use those fair housing, those non-compliant criteria, you can open yourself up to a fair housing lawsuit. It's pretty straightforward. So, but yeah, I think that looking over the question again, they have a policy. Every person has to submit their application. Everybody over 18 has to pay that fee. I don't know what state they're in. Some states do regulate the amount that you can charge. But from where I'm at, everything that they're doing is 100% correct. And it's very, very similar to the process that we follow here at Own Buffalo.
Yeah. Good.
So I think that was our last one, right?
Yeah. We got 2:02 Eastern.
Nice. So very good.
Yeah. I thought that was a fun one. It felt quick, that one.
It did feel quick, actually. I was kind of surprised by that. I thought that when I was looking at the questions earlier, I was like, oh man, these are going to be real tough. But I'm glad that they were not as rough as we thought they were going to be.
Yeah, a lot of I feel like the themes from today were guests, having guests in your rental property and how long can they stay and what are the legalities with that. And then I think the other theme was probably damage. I feel like we had 6 or 7 questions today about damage and who to charge and how can it be included in a rent payment and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, definitely a little bit different set of questions than what we typically get. Definitely interesting though. There's always something new to learn in landlording and property management and real estate. I learn something new every day. Every single day there's something new to learn. And I think that a lot of people feel like they get to a point and they can just stop and be like, no, I'm done. I know everything I need to know. And it's never the case in real estate. There's always something changing. There's always something new to know. Yeah.
And talking through there might be a common answer, but just the different scenarios and the different stories that we get submitted to us to try to arrive at that.
Yeah.
The most effective solution is like, okay, like, all right, I've heard this before. This is probably where we need to go. Like, and just kind of talking through it is good practice.
Well, and what works for one person in one person's area may not work at all for another person in their area. It's a situation where every market's a little bit different. Obviously, every state has different laws. So even something that we present here may not work for you in your situation or may not work for you in your state, which is why you kind of have to spend some time doing research above and beyond on almost every topic.
Yeah, for sure.
So before we jump out of here, I did bring up the RentPrep YouTube page. There were a couple of videos that I just wanted to highlight here in case people haven't had an opportunity to check them out yet. The first one that I wanted to mention is this first look into a foreclosure. This was a video that I put together based on one of the banks that we work with. We just had a new foreclosure assignment, and that is a true first look at a foreclosure. I hadn't even been through the place yet, and basically walked through with my camera and recorded exactly what you see as a real estate agent the first time you walk through one of these foreclosure assignments for the first time. So you get to see kind of the nitty gritty there. And that one actually wasn't too bad. I've been in some real nasty ones. That one wasn't too bad. And then there's a video that we posted about a month ago on top rental calculations landlords should know. This is a nice one, and it's actually going to have a companion video coming out in the next couple weeks on how to analyze a rental property. And that's going to get into, we actually introduce a spreadsheet that I've been using for I'm going to try to
Total
mute this
cash.
before. There we go. We introduced a spreadsheet in this one that I've been using to analyze rental property for a long time now. And the companion video to this goes into a lot more depth on how to actually decide whether or not the property that you're looking at is a good property that's worth the investment or something that you need to turn around and run the other way from. Because I feel like a lot of investors don't have a clue when they go to make offers, and it can really turn around and bite them.
Yeah, I know we included some of the top calculations in the RentPrep for Landlords newsletter that goes out weekly on Tuesdays, which you can sign up for on the RentPrep website all over the place. There's different areas where you can sign up for it. I know we included that one of those posts in the newsletter, and you had already gotten, I know within the first like hour or so of sending that out, you already had a boatload of requests for the calculators and those tools. So we're glad that landlords are finding it useful.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a free tool as well. Like, it's worth noting that there's no charge for that. It's one of those things that I developed it because I had a need for it. I basically have been tweaking it over the years as I've needed to add things or to make it a little bit better here and there. And it takes about 5 minutes to really do an analysis on a rental property once you know what you're doing. And that video will take you from not knowing the first thing about cap rate to understanding what DSCR is. So it's a good video to take a look at for sure.
Cool.
All right. I think that's pretty much it for this month's AMA session, right, Josh?
Dude, that is it. It is already the end of July, middle to end of July. So we are almost coming back around to August, and then before you know it, at least for us up in the Northeast, we'll be getting back into the fall and the colder weather.
I'm not interested. Listen, it's like 82 degrees here today, which is nice. Like, that's a nice summer day here in Buffalo. I'm not looking forward to snow again. Like, I'm not going to lie. That blizzard last year where we had 7 foot of snow really took a lot out of me. I'm not looking to get back to that time of year.
No. Well, we still got a couple more AMAs until then.
Yes, exactly. So on that note, everyone, join us for our September. Nope, we're still in July. Join us for our August AMA. And actually, I can pull up the date of that real quick if I think I have that. We think we scheduled that already, didn't we, Josh?
Yes, I believe.
Let's see here.
Might be middle of August.
It's mid-August. It's the 21st. So it's going to be on August 21st. That'll be at noon. Nope, at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then obviously the replays go live after that, and you can watch the replay after the fact. Other than that, though, make sure you guys are checking out the podcast. Check out our YouTube channel. Check out our newsletter. Check out the Rent Prep for Landlords Facebook group if you haven't checked that out already. Check out rentprep.com when you need tenant screening. Is there anything else that we didn't mention?
No, you can follow us on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We're on LinkedIn too. But yeah, I think that's all the different areas. Maybe it's all the different areas that we're at.
There'll be a new one by next month anyway.
I'm sure there will be.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. If you got some value out of this, do us a favor, like it and share it with a friend or family member that can get some value out of it as well. That's how we grow, and that's how we get to educate more and more people. I'm Andrew Schultz with rentprep.com for Josh Ungaro. Josh, I'll talk to you next month, and thank you everyone for listening.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew.